Hi, welcome to this webinar. My name is Jakob Ideskog. I'm the CTO of Curity. I'm going to be introducing the DevOps Dashboard today, which was released in Curity 5.3. With the DevOps Dashboard, we're trying to solve a few problems that we've been seeing customers have been struggling with in large organizations. Namely, that you have a lot of development teams that are working on seemingly unrelated projects. You have teams working on websites, on mobile apps, APIs, intranets, all kinds of different developments going on. And what's common for all of these teams is that sooner or later, they're going to have to communicate with APIs, or their clients is going to have to go through a gateway and need authorization, et cetera, et cetera. So the claims-based infrastructure, the tokens and the scopes and the claims that go in that somehow needs to be mapped onto the application. So the team, when they're ready, they call the identity team probably and say, hey, we need a client, or we need these scopes to be added to our client, or we just got this new API and we know it's going to need these things in order to work properly. And maybe that's an email, or maybe that's a phone call away to the identity team, but there's time here that's being stolen by the fact that we have to sort of stop and hold and wait for someone else to do something in a central system and then go back. And this obviously doesn't scale if you're a larger organization. So what the DevOps dashboard is trying to do is enabling these teams to manage it on their own. Of course, you could do this in Curity already before. You could set up delegated access to the admin UI and have teams log in there. But there were a couple things that were blocking that. Using the UI as a non-administrator or non-familiar person with Curity can be complicated. There's a lot of things you can configure in Curity, as all of you probably know. So having that access given to someone who has no idea what it is probably just confusing. So that's not really a good solution for anything, even though you could set up permissions so a user could log in and only edit a particular client or a particular scope or something like that. It would be a lot to navigate, and you'd have a lot of things to teach that group or that team for that purpose. The other thing is that the admin UI is restricted to username, password, login only. You can use credential managers so that you could log in against some Active Directory or something like that, but it's only that. So it's really not meant for a big distribution of users throughout the organization. It's meant for operators closer to Curity. So what we're introducing now is something we call the DevOps Dashboard, which is a companion to the admin UI. It's a separate thing. It's a separate program that starts, that Curity launches when you enable it, and it's there to give you a simplified UI for teams, where only the tasks they need to do are available and nothing else. So it's a subset of what the admin UI can do. It's much simpler, but it's built for distribution in a different way. So you can have a lot more users logged into it at the same time. You can manage access rights to it in a simpler way. You can also have your operations team logging in and viewing alarms and service impact analysis on a production system using the dashboard only, instead of having to give them access to the admin UI. And of course, all of this is access controlled with role-based access control and using NACM, netconf access control management, where we can fine-grained authorize each configuration element in Curity. So I'm going to show you a bit on what this really is, this DevOps dashboard. So let's start by jumping into the Curity admin UI, as you all know what that looks like. The admin UI, in this particular example, what I've done now is I've set up a bunch of profiles. So I have multiple systems running in the same Curity instance. I have something I call the internal authentication profile with internal token profile. I have a regular authentication with another token profile, a standalone token profile that doesn't have an authentication profile tied to it, and a standalone authentication profile. So if this was a development environment, maybe we're doing different things. Maybe I want separation for parts of the organization as they're developing. Some of these are perhaps more in a later stage of testing, and some are perhaps earlier stage of testing. So I have these various profiles, but I have them in the same Curity cluster configured. So now, if I would go into this in the regular UI, we can see that there's a bunch of clients configured in this particular profile. There's some scopes configured, etc. So it has things in it. So what's new now is instead of giving access now directly to that profile in the UI, I can go to the admin service here and I can enable something called the DevOps Dashboard. So if I click enable on that, it was already enabled, so let me cancel this. This button here shows up. And there's a new service enabled on the admin node, which is now the DevOps dashboard. So as you know, by default, you log in to /admin to get to the UI, but the DevOps dashboard, you go to /admin/dashboard on whatever host you configure the UI. So if I click that button, it will take me to another service now. And as you can see, it's a different type of login. So what are we seeing here? Well, we're actually seeing a regular Curity Authentication Service login. So to the DevOps dashboard, I can configure it to be whatever I want as a login. So if we go back here into the admin UI, it's currently configured to take the username authenticator only. But I could, of course, say, now I also want the email authenticator to be, or whichever you want to be possible to use when logging in. So if I would restart this login, I can see I have 2 authenticators now. So it's using the full authentication profile to log in, which is really powerful. It means you can do federated login to the dashboard. You don't have to manage the users in Curity if you don't want to. It's completely configurable now. You can have multi-factor or whatever you need. So I'm going to log in now. Just going to do the simplest way with the username one. So here you can see it looks a lot like the regular UI. It's just a lot simpler, a lot smaller. I can see that there are 3 token profiles right now. I logged in as a user John, so let's see what I can do. If I go here, can't see anything. I could see that there was a profile, but I can't really do anything with it. If I go to the token profile, yeah, here I can see. So I can see 4 clients here. So as John, I have permissions to view one particular profile configured right now. It can be configured so that I can only read or I can write. I can see all clients, some clients, and so on. So if I were to make a new client here, I can see that it looks slightly different than what it does in the regular UI. I get templates for what the client should do, and this will pre-configure the client with the appropriate things needed in order to be the type of application suggested. But since John here only has permissions to use a token profile that has limited capabilities enabled, it can only do server-to-server clients. So, okay, maybe I need a new server client, so I'm going to name it server client, select that template. How do I want to authenticate? Well, I'll use the secret, for instance. Do I need any scopes? Sure, I want that scope. I'm going to save that. That creates the client right away. So the transaction is already set, if you will, if you've worked with a regular UI. And as you can see, it already has the client capabilities, the client credentials capabilities set up. The scope is already added. So it's ready to use like that. And that's different from the regular UI. It's meant to be simpler, but the client view itself looks a lot like you would expect from working with the regular admin UI. So if we were to go back to the regular UI, so now we're back in the admin UI. let's look at what this group thing means. There's an item to the left called DevOps, where I can see permissions now for my development teams. So what we're working with here is we call them groups or teams, and I can either create a new one or select one. So let's just do like test 1, 2, 3 as a team here. And then I can say, okay, what do you want to access on this one? Do you want to give it access to view alarms or work with clients? Which profiles do you want this to be active on? All profiles or just a selected one? I just want it to be, for instance, the token profile like this. All clients or selected clients, maybe all. We can see if we want to allow them to modify scopes or not. We can also say, should it be read-only for clients or not? And that's it. So it's a very convenient wizard to use now to set up access control, which is a pretty advanced setup because it will set up rules all over in order to ensure you can access those things and everything you need in order to work properly with clients in that profile. So now when a user login that is part of the group test 1, 2, 3, so this can come from anything. If I were to use Federation or Google or whatever as login, as long as that group is mapped in the access token when I log in, I will get access that belongs to this group. So you can manage groups any way you want. Set up an authentication action that assigns groups to the user, or look them up in Active Directory, or whatever makes sense for you. So the group, this is just a mapping, what it will do. So let's try something else. So you can see here I have a few groups. I had dev1, which was where John was assigned before, which could see the token dev profile and could see OAuth clients. I have another group called dev internal, which can see another profile, the internal token test profile, can modify clients. So let's see what it looks like. If I go back to the dashboard now, log out John and log in Jane instead, who is part of the dev internal group, I can see now I cannot see the token dev group as I could before, but if I switch now to the internal token test profile, I can see that there are other clients here I can see. And if I were to create a new client in this profile, I can see that there are other templates here, because here I have other permissions. This profile is set up to have authentication and it can do other things. So I could actually, in the other one, I could pretty much do an API and a server client. Here I can make clients which require authentication. So I can make a www client, for instance. And let's make one for OAuth tools. And I set the secret. And now you can see I can choose authentication mechanisms for this one. And scopes. Now I want to OpenID Connect on this one. And save. So just like before, it sets it up to be properly configured for the type of client I'm building. And we can see that it set the scopes, it set the redirects properly, it set the authentication methods properly. And if I would create another one, let me go back and instead use a single page application. Let's call it SPA. Set the redirects, use some authentication mechanisms, OpenID, user info. We can see that it not only sets the scopes and the authentication methods, it also makes sure that, well, since it's single page, it should require a proof key, for instance, or PXE, as you know. It didn't ask me for a secret because single page applications should be public. So it's set up to be no authentication. So it's really helping you, like a few clicks to set up a client in a much more convenient way than before. So you don't have to know as much. And just like normal, you can always go and duplicate an already existing client and call it something else. And that will work just like the regular UI would. You can view claims in the dashboard. You cannot modify claims. They're here for informational purposes, so you know what exists. There will be more things built out on this over the next year with mappings into scopes and so on. Scopes you can create, you can view, depends on what you set up for that user also. If I were to create a scope here, for instance, my scope 1, 2, 3, I have the regular things I can set up. I cannot control the claims from the dashboard currently. That's probably too intrinsic for the user who's using the dashboard. But if I will go into the admin UI now and look at this profile, of course, it's immediately reflected here that the scope was created. So when I have the admin UI view, I see what's going on always. They're working against the same configuration. You can have multiple transactions going at the same time. There's no collisions going on. All right. I'm going to log out Jane as well. And we're going to take another look here in the regular admin UI, jumping back to that, to the system view, and back here to the DevOps configuration. I made a last group here that I call Ops. And what we've been talking about so far is development teams that are creating new applications, and this is pre-prod usually. You don't necessarily run this in production. It's pre-prod. You're setting up your clients and your APIs, and when they're ready, you can migrate those into production. But in production, the DevOps dashboard is still quite useful, even if you don't use it for client management necessarily. You can use it to let your operations team get access to the alarms view, which came in Curity 5.2. So when I click this ops group here, I have enabled access to alarms only. So it cannot modify any clients. So that's the only thing here. So if I would log in, well, first of all, let's create an alarm. I don't know if you've seen this, but you can trigger alarms, test alarms in Curity quite easily. So if I do it on a real resource, they will actually show us the correct dependency and everything. So that's pretty neat. Let's do that. Let's trigger a test alarm for the default HSQL DB here, which is a data source. And I want it to be critical, and it's a failed connection. And let's update the admin node list. So if I trigger this test alarm, this is useful if you want to test alarm handlers and see that you got a Slack notification or however you're notified. But it's also useful because you'll see that in the UI, well, it's actually a test now, and so on. But your ops team, they don't have access to the UI necessarily because that's not what they work with, and it's a special username, password, etc. to get in here. But they might have access to the DevOps dashboard because this could be your company federated login. So if I would log into someone who's part of that ops group, I don't have access to any profiles, but I do see the alarms. So here I can see now the alarm, and if I click that, you can also see that it's a test alarm even in the dashboard. I see all the useful information that we print with the alarm, all the suggested actions. I even see the entire dependency tree of the impacted resources for this alarm, and I can see the status change history. I can copy this link and I can paste it in or send it to someone, and they get a direct link to the dashboard. And since the login to the dashboard was federated, they could probably also get in there quite easily without having to look up who do I call to get a username or password to see this alarm. So setting up a special group for alarms and using that in production, just so that you can have your operations team get more information if something were to be sketchy in the production environment is quite a benefit when using the DevOps dashboard. And finally, of course, all these permissions, they're the same type of permissions we're using in the regular UI. So if I have a super user in the UI, which I obviously do, I have an admin user who's the admin group with full access to everything. If I log in with that and I map to that group, I do have full access even in the DevOps dashboard. So I can view all the profiles and all clients in all profiles and so on. So you can definitely have an unrestricted access here as well, but the nice part is that it's still restricted to the client scopes and claims and alarms. You don't have, you can't get lost, so to speak, in the entire configuration model of Curity. It's limited, so it's still helpful even if you're using fewer groups or no groups, just the admin group, but having people manage their own clients. All right, so that's the DevOps dashboard. And like I said, there'll be more things being worked on with the dashboard onward. We think it's a great tool. And we see a lot of potential of using this in especially pre-production, but also production in Curity onward. And if you have ideas or suggestions, we're happy to listen to that also on what you might need in your particular environment, because we're always open for good ideas at Curity. Any questions before we end this shorter webinar today? No, it's crystal clear. Can mention, if I didn't already, it's available from Curity 5.3. So if you have 5.3, you can see the toggle in the admin UI and you can enable the dashboard from there. And if you have any questions, just let us know and we'll help you out. Thanks for listening.